Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, we're going to have a fellow member of Team Kevin Kushman, who is the CEO of Electrada. And we're going to talk a little bit about the electrification of fleets and how they're utilizing what they call 360 charging as a service. So I'm very interested to hear about this, and also interested to hear kind of about the evolution of electrification of fleets and where we are with that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about a multi-site customer that they're currently rolling out and how that's going and what that looks like. So Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Kevin. Thanks for including me in the program. Great to be here.
Definitely. Always happy to have another Kevin on, of course. So tell us a little bit about Electrada and what it is you guys do.
Thanks. So Electrada is coming up on a 4-year-old company, although you think about a startup in electrification and fleet electrification specifically, startups usually don't take a lot of room in that space. You see a lot of large industrial automation companies playing the OEMs, of course, the vehicle manufacturers, the charging manufacturers. Electrada was started with the premise that distributed power and electric fuel primarily is a pretty fragmented environment currently, and that fleets, in order to make this major transition in what supports a significant part of their business, a critical part of their business, are being asked to sit in the role of system integrator between all these new technologies, both vehicle and charging, trying to understand electricity as a new fuel, goods around. And that's a very difficult spot to be in, and then actually scale the transition strategy all at the same time. So Electrada is built by folks with electric utility backgrounds, distributed power backgrounds, mobility, and thinking about things more from a fuel transition perspective rather than just thinking about charging as a bunch of boxes you use to plug vehicles in. It encompasses energy management. It encompasses working with utilities, also including things like renewable power as a comprehensive solution, because we believe that's what will really allow fleets to scale.
Interesting. So you are essentially kind of putting together the infrastructure for these fleets. Is that correct?
It is. So we take on the entire challenge, which starts with identifying what the use case is, how many vehicles, what the duty cycles look like, where and what properties would they be deployed to, what the mileage considerations are, the loading, the refrigeration requirements, all of that. And we build a very surgical look at that, and we call it a load shape, which essentially translates into what the energy capacity planning needs to look like to electrify any fleets, whether they're 20 vehicles at a site or 200. And that translates into a power provisioning requirement, which starts the process of how many chargers, how much capacity, transformers, how do we need to start working with the utility? And on top of all that, we're the ones that develop and invest in the solution. So we're actually the infrastructure owners and provide the charging as a service by removing all the risk from the fleet owner themselves, and we're shouldering all the risk from technology, reliability, and cost. So essentially you're signing up for miles or kilowatt hours fully comprehensively covered as a performance contract. So we eat all of the technology risk or energy risk, and we give you a predictable price for the duration of a contract. So you can really budget your fuel cost, which is something that's very unique, quite honestly, to fleet owners.
Yeah, very interesting, because even you see some fluctuation kind of in pricing and electric, right, and utility. So it's hard to sometimes, like you said, budget that, and it makes it make it a little more digestible in a sense, right, to electrify the fleet. So I mean, in that sense, like if we look at the electrification of fleets overall. I mean, where are we kind of in the evolution of that, and where would you say like the market is right now on, kind of the temperature of electrifying their fleets?
I think what we're seeing now is we're kind of emerging from the early adopter stages, or the early days where there's been a lot of pilots, the kind of sub 10 vehicles at a site type pilot, where organizations are just trying to get their arms around what it means to the drivers, what it means to the managing the facility flow, operations, almost that time and motion type of impact by having electric vehicles there, what it means to have a different range in terms of the vehicle capabilities, using new vehicles, how reliable are they? So all that is starting to coalesce around a few specific attributes around reliability, vehicles, and how to tune your operations to accommodate new vehicles, new EVs. We're starting to see folks start to make larger bets and say, okay, we want to be in a sustainable transportation. We're starting to see the real players shake out and a lot of consolidation in the market as far as vehicles go. We've seen a lot of the early vehicles that kind of came out through the SPAC craze. A lot of that's being rationalized and moving toward a handful of providers that I think there's a view that reliability will be there. And so larger program bets are being made. We see announcements in the last several months from groups like Cisco Food Service, who ordered 800 e-Cascadias from Daimler. And some of those larger chunk orders are being placed. And we're starting to see larger organizations adopt this beyond pilots, which sometimes provide false positives, quite honestly, and sometimes false negatives. And a lot of it's born on the backs of free money or grants. And that doesn't really give you a great ROI case either as you start to scale. So we're starting to see folks wander, a little more methodically into what it means to scale this.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly something, and it sounds like, what you guys are doing is certainly helping to alleviate some of those initial concerns around infrastructure and things like that. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I had a discussion with somebody recently, and talking about kind of Amazon and how they've electrified some of the trucks in the fleet, and I certainly see them around in my area, New Jersey as well. But certainly a couple times, and this person I was talking to about a friend, we seen a couple where they've been getting like towed, I guess, because they ran out of charge or they didn't charge properly. I mean, what's really kind of and I think that's probably one of the big concerns out there, whether you're a consumer with an electric vehicle or a business with an electric vehicle, it's the range anxiety, I guess, right, is what they call it, right, and running out of charge. I mean, what really ends up kind of being the root cause there of, why are they running out of charge? Is it like an education thing for the driver, or is it an infrastructure thing? I mean, what really is kind of the underlying issue there?
And every case could be different, but if you're describing a circumstance where you're seeing EVs being towed because someone ran out of range, to us that signals an onboarding or a training issue. And we start all the way back in designing the specific use case to map what the route design gives you. So if your route design says, on average, I'm going to require 200 miles a day out of a light duty vehicle, there are very few solutions in the market right now. So you need to be thinking about last mile delivery from, the 140 and below as far as mileage goes. So you first tune the vehicle substitutions in the conversion strategy you're able to take on right now in the 2023 timeframe. Battery capacity and battery density and range will continue to improve. So more of those routes that have longer miles will continue to get nominated as eligible for EVs over time. But it's about starting with the route design, the duty cycle, matching the vehicles, especially if you have heavy cargo loads, like in a service fleet environment where you have a lot of tools or equipment, ladders, for example, in a telecom services environment that are going to weigh down the vehicle. If you're operating in weather environments, either super cold or super warm, where you have to accommodate the D rate of the battery for that temperature gradient. And in addition, you might have things like parasitic load. If you're refrigerating a box truck delivering groceries, you have to think about the wear on the battery there. So all of that diligence goes into tuning how much capacity you're going to need to serve how many miles. And that's the point at which the handoff occurs to the drivers, the fleet managers, transportation organization inside of a fleet. This is how you should be thinking about this, because the digital intelligence is there. It's in the vehicle. It's on the telematics platform. It's fully integrated back to the charging environment. So even we can see when vehicles are at 10 or 20% charge and they're not heading back to the depot to receive a charge, there's an alert that could be that could be positioned inside telematics to signal to the driver, hey, it's time to come back to the depot, even if you're before your last delivery. And that's just part of the onboarding and essentially tuning the use case while vehicle range is still an issue in some classes.
Interesting. Yeah. I was curious about that because I think because I had an electric vehicle previously, but then I switched where I was working, longer commute. It just didn't make sense anymore because the range wasn't there. And there was a couple of times I got pretty low, and I certainly was nervous a little bit. So I was curious about how you guys kind of address that and what's really kind of the underlying thing when you look at it from an enterprise business level. And that makes a lot of sense as that's kind of a lot of issues sometimes with new technology, right? Is the onboarding of it and the understanding from the actual person that's the user, right?
It's true. And we spend a lot of time with the OEMs. So our training regimen works with the OEM. So it's a seamless relationship. So whether it's one of the Class 8s involved with Daimler or Volvo or PACCAR, or it's all the way down to the light duties with Ford and others, we take that very seriously because that's the touch. It's the first time that the driver will interact with both the vehicle and the charging infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So it has to look like it's simple, it has to be very predictable. And it's the folks in the dispatch center who are now going to be likely for a while operating in a dual fuel environment as the electrification process continues across a specific depot. So it's up to us to make sure that we've created enough reserve margin in the vehicle use case, in the mileage and the route design, so that there aren't any issues that create this black swan event where we have 10% of the vehicles are out on the highway somewhere and they ran out of charge. That's obviously negative equity across the board. So take a lot of time in designing those programs.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's great to be able to have that in place. And I think have Electrada be able to come in and show you those things from previous use cases and make sure that not only just that infrastructure from the charging electrical perspective is there, but also then the full kind of comprehensive onboarding, training, understanding, and really ensuring that, it's going to work for you the way that it's supposed to work. So now you mentioned in earlier kind of briefly, you said the charging as a service, right? So you have this 360 charging as a service, and we have software as a service, robotics as a service, hardware as a service. I think labor as a service. I talked to somebody recently on the podcast about that too. And now we have 360 charging as a service. So tell us a little bit about that and how does that kind of work?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
So charging as a service isn't a new term necessarily. And a lot of the folks who have been participants in what we'd call the early stages of electrification have used as a service as a way to describe things as basic as equipment financing, where, hey, we're spending the money and you guys pay us a fee for access to it, all the way up to what folks are describing as turnkey, where we'll point to the contractor you should use and we'll give you the technology you should use. What we're describing with 360 as a service is a fully wrapped, capitalized and guaranteed performance environment where we come in and design the system. We look for the right technology specifically to the use. So we're technology agnostic. We only require that our technology providers can live up to our 99% uptime commitment and that they're OCPP compliant. So we're working with standards. So we have predictability on how they work. But we just do all the design, build, operate, and maintenance for a multi-year contract. So essentially you're buying electric fuel at a contracted price. And everything behind that contract price and the volume required is ours to be shouldered with. And we think that risk shift takes fuel or fleet managers to a place where now they can compare it really directly apples to apples against the marginal cost of liquid fuel. So if they're looking to make a choice, it's great to be sustainable, of course, and there's some premium a lot of organizations are willing to pay for transitioning to a cleaner fuel, zero emissions, or becoming more renewable. Yeah. But ultimately, it has to shake out in an ROI environment where you're getting highly reliable fuel to serve the same need that your ICE vehicle currently serves. And it's easier to access because the fuel is being provided at your location. So you don't actually have to add fuel stops to, if you're a logistics business, last mile delivery, or even a field services tech business, you don't have to add fuel stops into your daily routes, and that builds efficiency as well. But it's our burden to demonstrate that we can meet or beat the cost of liquid fuel on a per mile basis and provide the reliability that they're used to seeing by going to a gas pump.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense because that's always been kind of one of my questions around this electrification on the trucking side or the fleet side too has been, just that when do you charge, right? Like when do you figure out to charge and, is there potential? Because I see, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like I see where there's potential that you have a relationship with a customer that maybe, you do a drop off or a pickup at every day, like at a dock door while you're there waiting to get loaded, like you do an opportunity charge with them. Is that something that you guys look at in this infrastructure thing? And is that something that you think can be figured out in a way where cost can be shared there, but then mutually beneficial to both sides of the transaction, essentially?
Absolutely. So as a former EV driver and hopefully a future, again, EV driver, you recognize the benefit of maximizing or optimizing the dwell time of the vehicle when it's being loaded, unloaded, even in a brake environment, really has to map to the specific route design of that vehicle. So obviously, the most predictable use case is return to base, where you're going out on routes all day, you come back to the same spot every night. That's a pretty predictable energy requirement. If you're going point to point or doing kind of milk runs between locations, also pretty predictable. And you can put opportunity charging, even if it's a half-hour dwell time for loading and unloading at those locations, and completely wrap that solution. If you're doing multi-point or you're doing long distance over the road, then you have to think about the network effect of using assets that we would own and manage and accompanying that with a network interaction with assets that aren't owned by Electrada, which is fine. That's the way the market's going to fill in. And you see a lot of initiatives out there that are looking to fill in over the road. Over time, that will occur. Same way it happened in the cell tower environment, where cell towers started in the areas of highest utilization, and you start to fill in, and then you have roaming, and then of course you have ubiquity, and you don't even know what antenna you're using for your cell phone. And ultimately, that settlement will occur at a customer ownership level with the network you sign up with. And we think that'll be the same path that electrification happens over the next 10 years or so. But it has to first start in an environment of reliability and predictability. And that's why we've started in the depot environment.
Very interesting. Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity for opportunity charging out there, I guess we could say, right? But I think it's really interesting. And I think it makes sense, to start with home base and make sure that infrastructure is in place. And it'd be just interesting to see kind of like how that evolves over time. And, what does that look like for not only from a business enterprise level, but also from like a consumer level too, I think, which we're seeing a little bit here and there. I know I did say that I don't have an EV anymore, but I do have a hybrid, plug-in hybrid too now. So I do the garage I park at in the city. Actually, they have a charger, so I have like just enough electric to kind of make it to where I need to make it to, and then I can plug in again to make it home, which kind of works out. So really interesting, kind of the benefits there, and that you guys are passing on. I know I'm curious, like you're answering kind of the look at ROI, how do I figure out my predictability on fuel cost and fuel usage? But what are some of the other challenges that companies are kind of either coming to you guys or expressing in the market that's like holding them back right now from electrifying their fleets?
It's a great question. And it a lot of cases has to do with the team's makeup at the fleets that we're working with. So the larger fleets are operated by Fortune 500s. In a lot of cases, they have energy teams or facility teams that are somewhat familiar with electric power or have electric power coming into a warehouse or a distribution facility. And in that sense, the conversation is easier because they know what we're dealing with. But at the same time, there's a bandwidth constraint. And operating high reliability distributed infrastructure to provide mobility support is a full-time exercise. And a lot of those folks don't appreciate that this is not just an aftermarket sale where the EV OEM says, oh yeah, and this is the charger you should buy, and you get somebody to bolt it in and you're good. Energy management is a huge consideration when you think about impact on total cost of ownership for electrification. So it could be as much as 40 to 50% of a 5 or 10 year relationship with that vehicle is the cost of fuel. And so you think about California, where the cost of fuel is 3 times what it is between morning and afternoon in the 4 to 9 p.m. timeframe when all the solar goes offline, and California is in a significant reserve capacity shortage for power across the state. So the rates can actually triple. The inverse actually occurs in the Northeast, where power during the day is more expensive, but overnight it's less expensive. So you really have to tune the charging environment and the match to use cases based on what that underlying cost of power is. And then when we step in, we look at things like, should we put a battery on site that accommodates the ability to shift into those lower cost environments? Because our goal is to always find the lowest cost per mile solution. And that includes investing on behalf of the customer at that site for things like battery storage, or even things like integration of solar on a rooftop and using that solar power for the charging capacity required for the vehicles. So energy management is kind of this blur your eyes moment sometimes when you're thinking about it from the vehicle side, but it really does impact the total cost of ownership and return profile. And that's why we, as former utility folks, spend a lot of time configuring the energy profile and who's serving that vehicle load at what time of day.
That's very interesting, and I could definitely see the benefits to utilizing a service like yours, because I think for a fleet manager that hasn't utilized electrification in the past, trying to navigate all these things that you're mentioning now and figuring out all these different things can certainly, I think, potentially be a little daunting. You could say, probably, right? So. Yeah,
we use the analogy a lot, and it's not a perfect analogy, but it's similar. Is that 20 years ago when folks started to outsource IT or server capacity to the cloud, and they looked at services like AWS and Azure from Microsoft, and the IT groups naturally were reticent to give up control over servers that was hardware that they acquired. They went through a procurement exercise. It was a box with a certain function. And the early days of charging has been the same thing. We'll find the box, whether it's the lowest cost box or it's the thing that the vehicle person told me to buy, that we're emerging from that. And there's a lot of flexibility that is relying on folks to say, I don't have the bandwidth to manage this reliably. And if it meets or beats the cost I need to see for my IRR calculation, I can start getting on board with this because I did the same thing a decade ago on server capacity. And so that analogy is very helpful to play out, even though the technology is obviously different and the learning curve is a little sharper.
Yeah, very good point there. And I think it definitely is a learning curve there. And it's great to have a company that's focusing on kind of helping companies get through that learning curve, and also kind of making it in a digestible way where they're able to kind of realize, what is my, like you said, the ROI, and really come to the real perspective of what it comes down to, right? Which is typically the dollars and the cents, right? I mean, to be able to make it happen and make it make sense for your company. And I think that's what you guys are doing is really helping to do that based on what you're saying. So tell us a little bit about, you have a new multi-site customer that you guys are currently in the rollout phase, right, with your services. So tell us a little bit about how, I guess, what that looks like, and also how that's going.
So the first multi-site customer we announced last year was Ferguson Enterprises, and they're about a $30 billion enterprise, international company, but with a significant distribution operation in the U.S. They distribute hardware, plumbing supplies from importing or manufacturers, and they move product around to retailers as well as small shops or contractors. They have about 5,400 trucks that they run across the continent, which is a significant fleet operation. Some very large warehouses, 6-7 acres under roof type of circumstances. And they burn about 8 million gallons of diesel fuel a year. And they were moving very markedly to adopt a sustainability practice that included transportation. And when they started working with our partner, Holman Enterprises, on the fleet management side, tried to configure a program that could allow them to start in California, as many of these conversion strategies start, given the mandates and the high visibility there and the potential penalties for not operating zero emission vehicles. And they said, let's select a handful of distribution centers to start making this conversion happen. So we started working with them last year, concluded our contract, which is a multi-year, essentially an electric fuel contract, which allows them to see visibly for the duration of the contract what their cost per kilowatt hour will be for every one of those sites, which is different for every site because they're in different locations and different use cases, and apply that to the different vehicles they're deploying. whether they're class 6 or class 8s, and the route designs that they've used at those sites. So again, we asked them to not change anything relative to operations. We would adapt the electrification strategy and the infrastructure to what they needed to see, because these are massive facilities. They have a specific way to do things. They'll plug in a vehicle at 6 p.m. when it comes off a route, and they'll take it offline at 1 a.m. to load it for an hour, and then they'll come back and plug it in again. All across that same time frame. We discussed that you can't even really be charging that vehicle until 9 p.m. in California because the pricing is so extreme from the California utilities. So there's a lot of ingredients in the soup, but what we ultimately gave them was predictability. And what they gave us was a partner that recognized we're still emerging from the early days. And as this is important for them to demonstrate that they can adapt new technology, clean transportation, and build it into their existing efficient operations, we'd be right behind them to support that transition strategy. So we've been incredibly fortunate to be working with their team. And we hope it's a long-term, multi-decade relationship as they roll out across the country.
Definitely. Yeah. And I definitely see, the Ferguson trucks and vehicles all over the place all the time. So it was definitely great to hear that they're working with you guys and rolling this out and really making a push to electrify. And it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve over time, as well as with other companies too. So very interesting stuff with you here, Kevin. And I'm curious, before we close out here, like if a company right now is thinking about electrifying their fleet, whether it's, trucks, vans, whatever the case may be that they have, what really would be kind of the first step that you think they should take to start to evaluate that decision?
It's first really looking at the vehicle choices, and whether you work with a fleet management company or you're working with a consultant, or even if you just start contacting a group like Electrada, recognizing what the best fit is for the vehicles available in the market for the next year or two as you start to nominate those routes essentially into electrification. And at the same time, as you're thinking about vehicles, a lot of folks have gotten out ahead of themselves and ordered vehicles and then thought, okay, well, I'll just figure out the charging when the vehicles are about ready to show up. It's really important to think about the energy component to electrification at the very same time you start thinking about vehicles, because the battery capacity, the route requirements, and even the location of where the depot is are so critical to designing the charging infrastructure that we've seen those circumstances take 8, 9, 10, 12 months to fully get deployed. And you don't want to be in a situation where you have these shiny new vehicles sitting around waiting for infrastructure because the utility takes 6 months to get you hooked up. So those sorts of things is parallel thinking on energy vis-a-vis the vehicles. And secondly, truly thinking about whether you want to DIY something that's going to have this kind of impact on your overall critical transportation function, or whether you'd like to have an expert partner with you. And what we're finding is a lot of folks are getting to 20, 30 vehicles and saying, can't scale it, don't have the bandwidth, can't manage the multi-site interaction with utilities, not sure about this energy risk I'm taking on, I need to stop. And what we're seeing is almost this trough where folks are getting stuck, and we're finding opportunities to come in and help those folks. But we start by saying, even if you're a sophisticated fuel consumer, it doesn't necessarily translate to electric power, because it's a different commodity provisioned a different way. So we're just offering our help at the very earliest stages of planning. And we found that to be the most productive to save folks from the traps of DIY.
Very interesting and definitely good advice and insights there. And I can't imagine, like you said, having 20 or 30 new trucks and just having them sit there, not being able to use them, waiting on infrastructure. So definitely a great tip there, and very interesting stuff with you here, Kevin, learning about Electrada and kind of the state of electrification of fleets right now. If people are interested in working with an expert, as you said, and learning more about Electrada, what's the best way to do that?
Any chance to go to our website, electrada.com, you'll find a lot of information about us. You can even look at a calculator to determine how reasonable your use case is relative to electric infrastructure and what that price may look like from a guidance perspective, and get direct access to our team. So from that perspective, we're willing to jump in and grab the baton alongside the customers as they're considering what to do here and how quickly they should move.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So Kevin, thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the new warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the new warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.